Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron, and welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. I am joined by Hugh Jebson, who is the head of school at St. John's Episcopal School. I got to know Hugh. I've actually only been in person next to Hugh once, and that was at the Enrollment Management Association conference back in September. But I've been following Hugh for some time because he just writes really interesting things around how schools should be thinking entrepreneurially, how they should be thinking through a business lens. And I just appreciate his perspective. And so I thought, oh, like how much fun would it be to have Hugh on the pod? And then we can dig into that some more. So, Hugh Jepson, welcome to the podcast.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's great to chat and to share some ideas and to talk about schools. I love talking about schools.
Well, we'll dig into that. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and St. John's Episcopal School?
Absolutely. Yeah. As you said, I am the head of school. I've been here for 6 years. I'm in my ninth year as a head of school. I've had a very fortunate, blessed career in private schools, about 35 years, originally from the UK. So my teaching career began in England and then has continued in this country. And I've served a variety of roles in that career in both boarding and day schools, from teacher, coach, dorm parent, student activities, director of academics, assistant head, trustee. I like
All
to
the
think,
things.
I like to
All,
think that I've done
yeah.
just about everything. The school is a K4, 4-year-old through grade 8 school in urban Tampa. We're very much an urban school. It's an Episcopal identity, and we're about 600 children, and it's a good size, and a day school.
You've been pretty vocal on LinkedIn over the years about cultivating that entrepreneurial mindset as leaders, about thinking through the business ramifications of the independent school and business model. Why is that important today? I'm curious. Like, why have you spent what I imagine is a good amount of time and thought, putting those ideas out there into the world?
Yeah, well, I think, the genesis of it for me comes from a couple of things. First of all, I didn't anticipate many years ago that I would get into education. I am the product of a physician father who had 3 sons, all of whom he wanted to go into medicine. And I tell people he got 1.5 out of 3. And I got a degree in history and political science as an undergraduate and didn't really know what to do, and did some jobs to survive for a few years while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And some of those were in the business world. They were not executive positions by any means. They were entry-level positions. I worked at Target. I worked in a gas station and had a lot of interface with the customer relations, with the business side of it, and gained an interesting understanding of supply and demand, and sort of carried that through my career into schools, and also had a very good understanding as soon as I became a teacher of the relationship between school and parent in the private market, and became more and more interested in that as I worked through schools and gained an interesting understanding of how schools operate, and really developed what I describe as a little bit of a love, not so like relationship with the industry that I have served for a long time, because it seems to want to deny the obvious in many ways. And the obvious to me is that we are businesses. And in the world of academia, that is often seen by many as a dirty phraseology, but it is the truth. I have always felt that schools need to understand from top to bottom that they are a business. We are a nonprofit business, but we have to operate that way, and we have to see ourselves that way, and we have to associate with all of the terminology that goes with that in terms of client relations and marketing and profit and loss and expense, and really sell ourselves as businesses, because parents are buying a service. Over the course of my career, I've seen that relationship become much more transactional on the part of parents. And so schools have to respond and understand to that and manage themselves in a way that reflects that.
So, how have you set that culture at your school?
A lot of conversation, a lot of training, a lot of meetings early on. I came 6 years ago. And, the school was in a very different situation 6 years ago. It had had a lot of turnover in leadership. There were some orangish red lights flashing about the way the school was headed in terms of enrollment. Not unique, but all of the tangible things that would cause some concern in any school: declining enrollment, some debt, and leadership turnover. So there was sort of a brewing perfect storm. And I came in and recognized that one of the reasons the school was in the position it was in was that it was still operating as a late 19th, early 20th century school in a 21st century market. We're in a very competitive market, both public and private. There are probably 5 to 6 schools within a 7-mile radius of us that are all competing for the same families. And it's easier, I think, to come into a culture such as that and make changes than it is to come into a school that is high functioning, that it's difficult to make a case for change. There's nothing that supports a case for change more than declining enrollment and cash flow issues, right? And so really got on that, started to talk that language, started to bring in people that when I had the opportunity, made it a key part of the interview process for both faculty and administrators, and over time built that culture up. Now, the other thing I would say, and I'm happy to go into it, is one of my observations about our schools is that we talk the language of, we are a business. We tell our employees we are a business, and yet we still treat them as if they work in a school. And there's an interesting dichotomy there whereby we treat our employees as if they are doing it because they love it and that they are financial martyrs and the money doesn't matter. And of course, the reality is very different. And so made some changes culturally and made some changes practically that reflected the fact that we are a business. And I think in many ways, we treat our employees as if they work in a business. And so the conditions that we offer have become much more business-like. The incentives that we have to recruit people and keep people have become much more representative and reflective of what you would see in the business world.
Can you paint a picture for that just ever so
Yeah.
briefly?
So there are two I would say that made a big difference that I have observed over the course of my career. The first one is, PD, continuous learning, professional development. It always struck me as odd that in our industry, we tell children all the time, you've got to be a lifelong learner. You've got to be a lifelong learner. Here's the value of being a lifelong learner. And yet what they see is that lifelong learning is optional for the adults in schools. Most schools don't make it a requirement, certainly in private schools. And what I used to see was that the teachers who would show initiative for private or for professional development were often the teachers who needed least to do so. The teachers who needed most professional development had an opt-out because they weren't required to do it. So I introduced a requirement of 20 hours of PD every year for just about every employee in the school, including myself. And then the other big change was that I introduced merit-based pay. And that for me was a response to the fact that throughout my teaching career, I knew, I was one of those teachers that was there early in the morning, stayed late, felt it was important to get involved in every aspect of the school, whether it was in a dorm, coaching, clubs. And I used to watch colleagues who would show up at just before the start of the day, who would leave, couldn't get out of there quick enough, who didn't really want to get involved in much of the life of the school or the students. And they got the same pay raise I did every year. I didn't really think that was a way to motivate people to excellence. And it sort of frustrated me. And it sort of made me think, why am I working this hard? Why am I engaged this much? If somebody who's barely getting by is getting the same pay raise, basically they're getting a pay raise for coming back, not for the quality of their work, right? And I think that's one of the fundamental flaws in our school, personally, is that we treat our best and our most average employees the same when it comes to financial compensation. That's a practice that I think is one that's representative of schools not seeing themselves as businesses, right? That treating everybody as if they work the same, treating everybody and rewarding everybody financially based on a belief that they are all operating the same and they make the same commitment. And I think it's flawed. And so we put in place a system whereby our truly top performers, and it's hard to do, get a bump in their salary each year, right? And it's merit-based pay because I want the messaging to be that, you are noticed if you work really hard, you are noticed if you're highly successful, and we're going to recognize that and we're going to reward it.
Is there like some way that you are able to assess that?
We do. We have, all of our teachers are evaluated annually by the division directors, and we have in place a very clear set of rubrics. There are 8 clear rubrics that cover everything. It's not just classroom performance. It's communication with parents. It's positivity. It's a lot of different things. And basically, of those 8, a teacher has to get at least 7 top marks in at least 7 of the 8 to be eligible for that merit-based raise, in addition to the standard raise.
So it's very clear what they need, what someone would need to do if they aspire to be in that top band.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, I've interviewed so many heads over the past year and a half, and I always ask the question when I'm talking to a head, like, "Hey, did you receive any kind of business or entrepreneurial training on your way to that role?" The vast majority of them said it was just really wasn't substantively part of my leadership journey. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, how can they develop that business acumen? I mean, sounds like you got interested in it right out of university and then kind of cultivated something for you. But what are some of the ways that you might recommend a head or an aspiring leader think about this?
Yeah, I think first of all, they have to overcome that inherent obstacle that can be a part of academia, that academia in the context of private schools is not a business. My point is that heads have to acknowledge and embrace and be at peace with the fact that we are businesses. And I am constantly surprised when I talk to heads and when I've spoken at conferences, still how many heads and admissions officers are struggling with that. And in many ways, I think it's because they may have come to this world because they had some sort of visceral feeling against the business world and wanted to escape all of the money world. So academia and schools are a great place to do that. Unfortunately, that's just not realistic, at least not anymore in the markets that we operate. And I think, the other thing is that the mentality has shifted. Our schools not that long ago, I think the industry had a mentality of, here we are, you come to us. Now it's very much, we need to go out and find you, and we need to prove to you that we're worth your investment. So I think that's the key thing. For me, I would say, and this is something that's very important to me and that I do now with several colleagues, those who I work with and those who I have worked with, is get a good mentor. I had a good mentor early on who was a sitting head. I've had 2 fantastic mentors in my career who both exposed me to and gave me opportunities to learn the business side of the school. I think nothing is better than that, right? And so I do that with people that are interested in following this path.
That all resonates on a lot of levels for me. I love how you said that, it used to be that we would open our doors and the line would form and students would want to come through. But, now in this, it's just such a competitive era that we're in right now. Families have never had more choices in terms of how they educate their children. I think what you just said is something that we all should think deeply about. Now, I'm curious, when you arrived at St. John's Episcopal School, you had said that you were inheriting some issues. There were some things that you had to work through. So, you arrived, you brought this mindset, this business interest and training. How has that benefited your time? Like, how has looking through that lens helped the school get to where they are today?
Yeah, well, I think it's in a tangible sense, it's very clearly helped the school. The school is in a basically 180-degree position from where it was when I arrived, in terms of its finances, in terms of its enrollment, in terms of its culture, in terms of its retention. The other thing I would just add to what you just said, that also is a harsh reality that I think we have to embrace in the industry, is that loyalty is a thing of the past. And parents are not as loyal as they used to be. I think any head would tell you that, not that long ago, if there was an issue or a problem with the school or the family, the child was having some difficulty, there would be a concerted effort by the family and the school to try to work through that and for the family and the child to stay. I think those days are gone. What we see and what I hear talking to people is that parents will jump schools pretty quickly if they don't feel like they're getting what they want. There is, the old concept of loyalty, I think, is a thing of the past, and we're all seeing that. And it just makes it more important to embrace this idea that we have to see ourselves in a transactional relationship, at least on the part of the parents, and adapt to that. And so it's done all the things that I hoped it would in terms of helping the school move to a position financially where it can launch this master plan. There had been talk at the school for many years, of much needed facilities improvements, but the operations of the school just weren't there. Parent confidence in the school wasn't there. That's now there. We've gone from a position of financial weakness to a position of strength. And so it's I think adapting that model and all of the components of that model, and I can share specifically what some of those key ones are, has seen this turnaround. And they're really just adaptations of things that you see in the business world, right? But applied to the school model.
Can you elaborate a little bit? I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I think, I'd say there are three things that we've done. One, we moved to a perpetual enrollment agreement as opposed to annual enrollment. And we did that 3 or 4 years ago, and it's been very successful. And basically, what that is that rather than inviting our families to rethink their commitment to the school every year, we have them sign one contract. We have an opt out date each spring, and they are in until they opt out, right? They have to notify us by a deadline that they are not renewing. It's cut down on a lot of paper. It's cut down a lot of work for admissions. And it also, parents like it because they don't have to go through that process of signing a contract every year. The other is we moved away from the tuition and fees model. That's always been something that's frankly irritated me about our industry. When I was a private school parent, it used to bother me to no end that my children's school invoice would look like my cell phone bill, right? There would be a base tuition, and then there were all of these add-on fees. And I think one of the things we're not good at that we owe parents, if we talk the language of transparency, is that we have to be accurate and upfront about what it's actually going to cost them to attend our schools. And so we moved to a comprehensive tuition whereby we rolled a lot of the fees that were existing into an overall tuition number. We're very transparent. We publish each year what that tuition covers, what it doesn't cover, field trip. We wanted to make it easy for parents to know what they were being responsible for and what the actual cost of sending their child to the school was. And then the last one, and probably the biggest one, is I don't understand the long-standing, widespread practice in our school of deficit spending every year, right? And the model is one that is the antithesis of a good business model, whereby we charge less than it costs to educate each child, and then ask parents to cover that through annual giving. And I think that there's a lot of schools that continue with that model, unless they have very, very deep pockets, are going to run out of road in a few years. Because if you look at the combination of, there are two critical factors in the industry. One, the pool of people who can afford us is inverse to our tuition. As our tuition continues to increase, the pool of people who can afford it is decreasing. If you're asking a family, this younger generation of families that maybe don't have, or are first generation private school families, they don't have a really good understanding or family legacy in private education. You're asking them to pay ever increasing amounts of tuition and fees, and then you're telling them that even that doesn't cover the cost of educating their children, so they have to dig into their wallets again to make an annual fund contribution. I just don't think it's a good model. And I think it's harder and harder for schools to explain and justify that model, especially in the context of a value proposition. We have to be able to show parents what the outcomes are, what are the demonstrated outcomes to justify ever increasing expenses, and then annual funds that ask them to supplement the school even more. So we created a business model whereby the full cost of running the school is covered 98% by tuition. There's some supplemental income we use, but we do run an annual fund. But the case for support is to enhance the program. It's not to pay the light bill. It's not to keep the school running. It's not to cover deficit spending. And that's been very well received by our parents too.
So I've got so many questions. So first off, I'll start with the perpetual enrollment. Are you the only school in the Tampa area that's leaned into perpetual enrollment?
We were, until I just got notification today that one of our peers is adopting that model. Adopting them.
And that's been like, you pressure tested that legally, like that holds up perpetual?
Yeah, we did it all thoroughly, and I think the key is lots of communication.
Okay.
And we laid the groundwork for a long time with a lot of communication. And the communication was really about why this is good for parents,
Yep.
not why it's good for the school.
Yep.
And you can make that case by saying that who wants to be writing a contract every year? Who wants to be signing a contract? Who's got the time? We notify them if there are any changes in the contract, and we received no pushback.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's a red flag for a family. It sounds like just the way I've always thought about it. It's like one less thing they have to worry about. If they're not happy, they're going to make the decision one way or another.
Right. Again, I think it's, parents are quite used to that model in a lot of other areas of their life where they will sign an agreement once. And if they want to opt out, they have to notify the vendor rather than the vendor remind them every year. So
I mean,
it's not strange.
Think about the biggest purchase most people make, which is your home. You sign your mortgage agreement and then it just carries through the life of the term of the loan.
That's it.
Yeah. I do have a question about, so this all-inclusive tuition. So that basically you roll up all the fees minus, like, if you're going to take a group of students to DC or something like that, that involves extra fees. When you roll that all up from a pricing point of view, like, how do you sit in your market? Does that push you at the very tippy top, or are your expenses allowing you to control, how much of a tuition that is your expense management giving you an opportunity to have finer control over your tuition?
Yes. We are, in my opinion, vastly underpriced. Our tuition is, even with all of this, our tuition is anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 or $11,000 less each year than the base tuition, not including the fees, of our peer schools. I call them peers, not competitors, because there's no comparison, right? They charge a lot more, and there are a lot of other distinguishing features, right, that separate the schools from each other. So I look at our demonstrated outcomes at our high school. For those who are applying, most of our students will apply to a private selective high school or the IB program. We have the data that shows the success of the program, that shows the success of our graduates, it shows the acceptance rates, and we know what the first choice successes are of those schools. And we can combine that with the least expensive tuition in the market. And it drives me crazy because I think, frankly, we prove the quality of the product, but we are underpriced compared to our peers. And there's a clear philosophy behind that. We very much want to remain a non-elitist middle-class school, and socioeconomic accessibility is a key part of our mission. But it does drive me crazy because I think people are getting a bargain that they're not getting at any other school in the area because we combine the demonstrated outcomes with the value. I like to think it's well received by parents, and it certainly helps create the culture and the parent culture that we want to maintain.
And then in terms of the revenue model, 98% coming from tuition revenue, has that always been the case, or is that something that you've had to build to over time? Like, were you reliant on the annual fund to close the operating gap for a long time?
Yes, when I arrived, the gap model was in place. And interestingly enough, the main body that was responsible, I don't know whether it was by design or just by circumstance, was the Parents Association. The Parents Association was in many ways the fundraising arm of the school, which was great in many ways, but also, as you can imagine, created some challenges. And so there was a gap. It was quite a significant gap, as you would expect. The other issue that I faced was that our teachers were the least well paid. Probably a good thing that when I arrived, they didn't know how bad it was in the local market. And they were in the bottom 15, 20th percentile compared to their private school peers. We've been engaged through this business model of making sure that by the end of next year, every teacher will be in at least the 90th percentile.
That's such an interesting point, Hugh, because I've spoken a few other episodes in this series. I was thinking like McGillis School with Jim Brewer, trying to think right, off the top of my head, having a hard time remembering some of the others. Anyway, but what's interesting is that this point of paying teachers well consistently comes up when I'm talking to schools that have figured out how to re-architect the model to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a lot of sense. If you pay your teachers well, if you invest in your teachers, if you give them the living wage that they need in order to not stress on the little things in life, then they're going to be happier at work and produce better, with their students. Like, the correlation seems it seems clear based on all these case studies that I've done, like consistently, like, pay your teachers well, right?
I think we relied as an industry on this notion that teachers didn't do it for the money, and they were, martyrs to the profession, and it was a calling. And I think certainly there's an element of a calling to it. The best teachers that I've worked with have certainly reflected that and demonstrated that. But I think it goes beyond just the compensation. I think it referenced earlier this idea of a business practice. We make sure we have a very good benefits package. The school offers a very good PPO plan for no cost to employees. So we cover the cost for employees of the health insurance, good pension plan. We do a lot of teacher appreciation events in combined with the Parents Association and other things. We've introduced a discounted gym membership, do discounted pet insurance. We do travel grants, employee excellence awards that are peer nominated, and the recipients get $2,500 at the end of the school year as a sign of the schools. And that can be the maintenance staff as well as a faculty member. And we support our teachers traveling domestically and internationally, either for personal fulfillment and personal replenishment or professional development. And it's all intended to create a sense of care and community and nourishment that goes beyond just the salary. And I think, when I tell people that I'm interviewing, my job is to take care of the people that take care of the children. And that's not just a moral imperative in my mind, it's a pragmatic and practical.
It seems like, from an employee wellness point of view, you're very strategic about how you deliver time, deliver money, deliver resources in order to create a great place to work. I've done a bunch of podcasts on this with other kind of HR related people in independent schools. And this term that seems to come up pretty frequently is the talent development model. Like, we're really dialed in on enrollment management and the holistic life cycle of a student at a school. The opportunity is to apply the same sort of approach to faculty and staff. Would you say that that's your mindset?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are two things. One, there's nothing more important in my mind than a head does is put the right people in front of the children. And so I'm heavily involved with the hiring and the interviewing process because I think that's really, really important. If you get the right people, you provide the right support, the right resources, you identify talent, and you nurture and support it. I've worked and I know of schools whereby heads see talent development as a threat, and they might not want to nurture and encourage people to develop their talent and to develop their career ambitions because ultimately they might have to lose them. Heads should be trying to create opportunities to develop leaders in roles that may or may not exist in the school. If you have good people, find a way to keep them, right? I just created a Dean of Students for Girls position, A, because the school needs one, and B, because I have a phenomenal teacher who has ambitions to stay in the classroom, but not fully, and to learn. She's been teaching for a while. She's excellent. She's looking for some leadership opportunities, and I don't want to lose her. And so, we restructured that this year so that there's a dean for boys and there's a dean for girls. And I think that's, to me, is also one of the fundamental responsibilities. I know that I've done a good job, ironically, regretfully, if I lose good people because they want to move their careers forward. That's what I did. And it's a responsibility that heads have to nurture and support career growth, not impede it.
I don't think there's a greater sign of your legacy. The people that you are able to mentor and go off and do amazing things, whether it's at your school or others. I mean, that is just incredible impact if you think about it through that lens.
I think all good heads want to live on through others, even while we're alive,
Yeah,
right? Professionally,
sure.
to live on through others. And it's an enjoyable part of the job in a job that otherwise has a lot of sometimes unenjoyable aspects to it, right? Is that the people development and knowing that you are supporting people who have talent and that frankly that the industry is going to need and helping prepare them for that is incredibly fulfilling. I really enjoy it a lot.
Yeah. Last question as we begin to wrap up. So, like I said at the front end of this, I'm going to remind people at the back end. I got to know Hugh through following, all the things he's been writing about on LinkedIn. I just really appreciate it. So let's create a scenario for you here. So imagine a head of school called you and said, Hugh, like I'm really vibing with stuff that you're writing about. I need to bring like a more keen business sense to how I'm managing and running my school, but I'm not sure where to start. Like, what would you offer?
Give me a call. I mean, I'm happy to help, really. I think it depends on every school. Every school's different and every school's situation is different. Not every school will be able to move away from the gap model, right? I think pricing is important. Where you are in your market is important. And it's going to, I think, so I would say do the research, right? The first step is to see where you are, in a business structural sense, see where you are in the market that you're in, see how you compare in terms of tuition, in terms of enrollment, in terms of culture. Look at where you are in terms of your own business model. If you have a gap, how big of a gap it is, gather the information and then start to think about what are the entrepreneurial steps that I can take, what's feasible. And the last thing I would say is that all entrepreneurs that are successful have to be willing to take a step into the dark, right? And a step into the unknown. And so prepare so that when you are ready to take this leap of faith, and it's a leap of faith in your own ability and your own confidence that is supported by data, then do so. But make sure you're well informed. Make sure you are communicating incredibly well about any changes that you might be considering. And the ultimate point I would say is make sure that your board has got your back, right? Make sure that your board is informed of what you're doing and is supportive of what you're doing.
So, if somebody wanted to reach out and ask you a question or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that here?
Yeah, just, my email, hjebson@stjohnseagles.org. Fire me an email. I'm very happy to help in any way I can. As I said a few minutes ago, I actually talk with a lot of people informally that I've worked with and met, and everyone I meet in any role who has talent and who is interested in these things, I tell them, give me a call, right? The only interest I have is in help.
Hugh Jebson, head of school at St. John's Episcopal School in Tampa, Florida. Thank you for sharing. I do appreciate it.
It's great to talk to you, Peter. Take care.